Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement. Welcome back, everybody. In Mama Rising, we talk a lot about matricentric feminism, which in layman's terms is basically a rethinking of how feminism looks at motherhood. I remember when I first started studying this and I heard the term motherhood is what feminism forgot. I remember my reaction in that moment when I realized how true that felt for me. That in my pursuit of equality, in my pursuit of my ambition and my goals, I had never considered what it means to be a mother and how that would affect how I show up in this world. That's what today's interview is all about. You're about to hear a conversation with Erin Spahr. She is a therapist based in the US. Perhaps you follow her on Instagram as the Feminist Mum Therapist. If you don't, you really need to. Check the show notes for her details. In this conversation, we talk about feminism, motherhood, the reality that we live in, how we can come to terms with that, and how the insights of this understanding into how our culture and society view and value caring and motherhood, how that affects us on a day-to-day basis, and that it's not our fault when we feel angry or overwhelmed. It's not our fault the way we feel as we try and mother in this culture. I know you're going to love this. Please let Erin and I know your takeaways from this conversation and enjoy. Erin, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is going to be fun.
It is going to be so much fun. It's one of my favorite topics to talk about, which is feminism and motherhood. And one of the big teachings that we do in Mama Rising in our training is to really, we start from this, almost this point, the starting point of motherhood is what feminism forgot. And we're in this time in our life, in our culture, in our world, where it's really time to redefine what that looks like. And I know we're going to go there in this conversation. But first, I'd love to start personally, to hear how you came to this work and your experience of matrescence and becoming a mother. So take us back to when you became a mum 12 years ago. Is that right?
Just about. Yep. My oldest is about to turn 12 in a few weeks. So, goodness. I mean, I was a therapist. I was a new therapist at the time, and I was really interested in working, in folks with trauma. And I was working in like an inner city population with a lot of folks with a lot of like layers of oppression, who are in poverty, who had a lot going on. Before that, I was, interested as a baby therapist. I was interested in psychology, but I was always really interested in sociology and understanding the culture. Had a lot of experiences growing up that really made me sort of look, and sort of look at racism and look at, and not even feminism really until later. But I had been really primed to kind of try to, understand all of the ways that there were these inequities in our culture. And so when I became a mom, I remember just being like, boom, just hit me. It hit me probably before that, but I just remember like a moment being like exhausted in that like 24-hour post-birth period, and being like, I don't know how people do this without the support and the resources, the mental resources, the physical resources that I had. How people have been doing this whole time. It's like that you kind of like wake up and you before there's a before and an after, right? The before is sort of, oh, people, everyone has babies and this is just what we've been doing forever. But then when you come into it, it's like it really was a shock to the system just how much physical suffering and emotional suffering at first, and then of course there was the love and all of that, which I never worried about that. That wasn't personally, the bonding went really well for me, but just how tough it was, and
Mm,
psychologically how much responsibility and now you have for this little human that you don't have really that much control of.
that's
Like,
it.
it's like an impossible thing to sort of take on and not just be sort of blown away. So that
Mm,
became, my own experience. I definitely had some postpartum anxiety. Um, you know, I I don't know if I mean I didn't diagnose it or get it diagnosed or anything, but definitely had a lot of anxiety. I had a lot of rage, postpartum rage. I would really
mm,
lash out at my husband, right? Because he was there and he was not experiencing things the way I was experiencing.
mhm.
And so I became really interested in supporting other moms through this experience, and I'm sure we'll get into more. But that was sort of my introduction.
Thank you for sharing that. It reminds me of what I hear so often every day in my DMs and in my inbox, and I'm sure you're the same with your phenomenal Instagram account. If anybody doesn't follow you, I'll put the link to it in the show notes. It's such great content. You have a beautiful way of calling out what we need to do differently for mothers, but without this angry, sort of outraged energy. It's empowering and inspiring and
Mm.
insightful rather than angry. But I'm sure you get a lot of these messages as well, which is it's this feeling of, why didn't I know this? Why isn't anybody talking about this? When we land in motherhood, like you described, like it's, you sort of look around and think, how has everybody been doing this for so long and not
Yeah.
talking about the reality of it?
Right. Yeah,
Ah,
and now people I think are seeing online there is more of the sort of authentic motherhood content, the real motherhood content, which is wonderful. And but I think sometimes people forget that even a few years ago, I mean before, I think Instagram pandemic, motherhood really just exploded, this like we were all looking inside a little bit more in our homes, but before that, it was not talked about. It was only the good stuff, only the glossy, beautiful stuff,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And so that's certainly when I entered it. I didn't have, Libby Ward, or people who were talking about motherhood in this very authentic way. So yeah, that's even very new. Sometimes I hear people saying, like, why don't we talk about the good stuff? It's like we were talking about the good stuff. Now
Yeah.
we're trying to figure out the balance, I suppose. But
Yeah, I agree. I'm the same. My eldest is 16. So I wasn't even, as everyone who listens to this podcast will know, I wasn't even on Facebook when she was born.
yeah.
Like there wasn't anything. There was the beginnings of mummy blogs,
Yes.
just the beginning, but it wasn't an insightful or honest look at what was happening. So this is a very new shift. It is something that, like you said, I feel like some people think that it's happening a lot now, but actually we've still got so far to go. So
Mm.
one of the things that I love in what you do in your work is talk about um, the invisibility of motherhood, how our culture and our society don't see or value or acknowledge all of the parts of motherhood. Can you talk to us about your feelings around that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that's like invisibility related in motherhood. We talk about the mental load, right? Which is mostly invisible. The things that we're always kind of thinking about, that starts like very early, sometimes before even planning to try to get pregnant, there's learning about that. How do I make a baby? Then how do I, what am I supposed to eat? Like get pregnant, and what things do I stay away from? And often we see women taking that stuff on from the very beginning, and then that tends to
Mm.
continue, right? What I think I need to sign my child up for swim lessons, or I wonder about this birthday party that we have planned. How do I coordinate that? There's so much invisible labor that we women tend to do, and it starts so early. And I think because it's women's work, because it's invisible, it's really easy to diminish that. And when we
Mm.
talk about things like equity, which is really common right now, talking about how do you share the load in a relationship with your partner, I think that invisibility part can really make it hard to sort of know, is this equal? Are we each kind of carrying our fair share? Right? And so I think sometimes even those of us who are maybe the default or she-fault parent who are doing a lot of that thinking can undermine it ourselves. So I think that's just
Mm.
like one way that I think that
Mm.
invisibility shows up. But I think also, just thinking about how our world, our society, it's really catered towards men. It's a lot of the previous waves of feminism helped women function more in a world made for men, right? By, I guess, sort of being more like men or conforming in certain ways. And becoming a mother, it's hard to do that.
Mm.
You can't do that, right? There's something very unique about that experience. And you realize that when, you're in the workplace, like as I was, having that morning sickness, and not knowing what to do, but, be sick at work and not be able to go home because it was just expected that I had to prove that.
Mm.
And so on and so on. There are many experiences of that. So I think that invisibility, that sense of like, I have to somehow you know, put my pump in my bag, breast pump in my bag and pretend that I am not thinking about 10 things at once to show up to this very patriarchal workplace and world, and hide my kids from, make sure they're quiet and they're behaved and they're right. That invisibility of our children represents our invisibility, right? So there's just so many ways that I think you realize how much this world is not catered towards mothers and families
Mm.
and kids.
I've never really thought, and I've been doing this for a long time, I've never thought about that invisible load starting even before you're pregnant. Because you're right, it's this mental load that we're carrying about the possibility of one day becoming a mother or how we're going to do it. Even planning it around, oh, well, if I'm pregnant this month, then that means that the baby will be due before Christmas and that
Yeah.
project at work is due. So I should probably not get pregnant this month. Like even that, I'd never thought about that before. And I've literally been talking about this for 16 years.
Wait, I think it goes even earlier though. Okay, did you ever plan a wedding?
Yes.
Right? I planned a wedding, and
Good
that was
point.
like mental load city. It's just like, and everything is like, well, these are the things that women you care about, right? You care about it, so you pick it out. The sweet man shows up, maybe he does something, but it's like we're primed, and I'm sure it goes even earlier than that. We could keep going, right? But we're really primed to carry so much of that and to accept it and say, well, I guess I wanted this, so it must all
That's
be my
it.
fault or my,
Yeah, my responsibility. It's almost and we won't get too ranty here, but
I
it's like,
love to rant.
we love the rants, but it's like once the proposal is done, which is the
Mm.
man's, part of the role, once that's done, he's out. And then
Yep.
we step in and do the rest. I've never thought about it like that before, Erin. I love that. And before we move on from our rantiness, I do want to also bring up this amazing post that you did recently around the education system literally
Mm.
depends on the unpaid labor of women, that the PTA culture, the parent teacher culture, the parent teacher, the parent committee, the
Yes.
organizers, the volunteers, all of that at the school relies on mostly, of course, the mothers, and how unequal, unpaid, undervalued this is. It is so true that it relies on us doing all of this. And most of us, what if you're working as well? What if you have other children? What if there's other things going on in your world?
Yes, and I think some people can sort of look at that on the surface and say, well, men and women can do they both are invited to do it. We're not saying only women. But I notice a difference even in myself if I see like some sort of volunteer thing or something, volunteer for this field trip or raise money for that. I take the paper and I feel like guilt if I can't do it. Or I feel angry, and my husband is just like doesn't even it doesn't hit him in the same way because he doesn't feel that level of responsibility, right? So it's
Mm,
like because we have these double standards, he can sort of walk through the world sort of not feeling like there's this constant, point he's trying to measure up to the way I think so many women are, right? The good mom goes to the field trip and, brings cookies and, juice boxes to the sports team games and all of these things, and they matter and they're lovely, right? But they're part of this care work that
mm.
again is underpaid, not paid, expected, right, of women.
Which brings us to the point that it often is an internal struggle. That,
Yes.
outwardly we could say, well, you don't have to volunteer for that. You don't have to say yes. And so, as a therapist in your work, I would imagine this is the real work
Yeah.
of undoing this internal battle of, but a good mother would do this,
Mhm.
and allowing ourselves as the mothers as well to unhook from that culture that says we should be doing this if we are good mothers.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's internalized patriarchy or internalized misogyny or whatever. And we all have these ideas, I think, of what a good mom is and does. And I think it makes sense to want to live up to that. But the truth is we really can't. We can't live up to all of it. So we have to make choices about which things do we value, which things we have the capacity for. What
Mm.
what else is on my list today? Which things are going to be important, and then trying to have some self-compassion when we can't meet all of those things.
So, is that where we start? So, for the mothers and the women listening, if they're feeling this internal patriarchy, this internal struggle, where do we start to be able to let go of those expectations and to start being, I guess, a little bit more autonomous in that?
Yeah, I think it's first making the invisible visible, just noticing
Mm.
it. First, we have to understand like where these thoughts are coming from, that they're not just ours. They didn't just, come out of nowhere. So I think first it's sort of investigating and being thoughtful when you experience something like mom guilt or mom shame or mom, right? These are things that we attribute to mothers because it's a very intense part of being a mother in our society. But so I think first it's just kind of that noticing, right? That okay, well I'm feeling guilt about spending too long going grocery shopping. Like that somehow I've had that feeling where I'm the one who goes grocery shopping for the family, but if I'm taking too long, I feel like somehow I'm taking away something from my family or I'm missing out or my husband's going to be stressed or something where it's like there's no winning here. You're nodding,
So true. Yeah. Yeah,
right?
you've just brought back a memory. I remember sending a text message apologizing that I'd taken so long at the shops. Oh my gosh, yes, I remember doing that when they were little.
Yeah. Yes,
Mm,
it's right? And it's like, what are you doing wrong by going and getting food, providing for the family
mm.
in that way? So, yes, I think that just like first recognizing it and not just trusting that the feeling of guilt means you're doing something worthy of that. And then that's a process. That takes some time, right? And I think um having compassion for how difficult that is, that we might not solve it. We might not get to some place where we're just, I'm a feminist and we might be wrestling with these things for some time. And so I think, yeah, I think often going back to sort of like, what do I care about? For me as a therapist, the things that matter the most to me as a therapist and a mom are the emotional sort of like the connection that I have with my kids, sort of teaching them emotion regulation and how to have relationships with people, so I tend to care more about that. So if my, when my kids were toddlers, having a temper tantrum, that would feel like a moment that I was like, okay, I can handle this, and I'm a therapist. I could tolerate some feelings, right? So I know not everyone finds that so appealing, but, like, those are moments where, like, I'm gonna really lean into this, I'm gonna try to help, but then, if I used up all my energy and that toddler wanted a popsicle for breakfast, okay, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, that might not be the right choice for everybody, but for me, it was sort of letting myself figure out which things I can put energy into and which things to let go of, and
Mm.
then, of course, there's always support. There's reaching out. There's other people need to be part of that too, which we could talk about because I don't think this is just an individualistic, solution. I don't think we can solve this on our own. But
Yes,
starting
that's right.
starting with with sort of checking in with yourself and what notice and have empathy and make some choices and then forgive yourself, repair with yourself if you feel like, I'm bummed that I reacted that way or that I let my anger take over, right? Or whatever mistake we make, because we
Mm.
will.
Yes, I remember when I'm divorced now, but and when I first became, a solo parent in that way, realized very quickly there was some things that I was just never going to be able to stay on top of. That I thought I was a little bit more advanced in my letting go of the good mother. And then it really smacked me in the face when I was
I bet.
suddenly on my own with these kids, and there was no possible way that I could do all of it. And so things like making those sandwiches every day for school went out the window. There was just no way I was going to be able to get up in the morning, do my exercise and my things that I needed to do before waking them up, getting them ready for school, all three of them. Lunches were not going to be made. Exactly. And it was so interesting, Erin, how much that was a process of me letting go of this idea that good mothers make sandwiches for their children's lunch
Yeah.
every day, that I had to outsource that. I put money at the canteen, at the tuck shop at the school every week so that they could feed my children. I was just not going to be able to do
Mm.
that. And it was so interesting to me, like I said, I'd been doing this work for so long, how internalized these stories are.
Mhm.
Even when we are so aware of
Yeah.
why they're there and where they come from, it is so deep in our
Mhm.
culture and in our understanding of what it means to be a mother. A good mother makes their lunches every single day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a really big
Mm.
realization of how deep this internalized story is.
Yes. Oh my goodness. That I could just imagine. I'm like empathizing with those moments. Yeah. And I also think about cycle breaking and,
Mhm,
thinking about the things that we associate with good mothers. I've got two boys. I want them to feel a sense of responsibility for chores, for taking care of themselves, and that's also something to kind of factor in. Like, how much do you then say, like my oldest, I say, you got to get your lunch together in the morning, you've got to get your
mhm.
stuff yourself, right? And I notice myself sometimes, like, internally struggling. How much do I take on and,
Yes.
baby
I
them and care for them? And how much do I expect of them? And yeah, it's a constant,
It is, isn't it?
internal.
I don't know about your boys, but my kids roll their eyes a little bit and they're always like, "Oh, mum's having one of her feminist moments," where I'm like, "Just because I'm the mother doesn't mean that I'm gonna do this for you." What is it like raising 2 boys with this lens in your household?
It's a challenge, I'm not gonna
Mm.
lie, because I I feel like there's a delicate dance. There's one thing to talk to adults, right, about feminism, talk to women and help them unpack it, and talk to men, talk to my husband, and sometimes challenge him. But with kids, I've been and sometimes more vocal. Like my oldest son is so smart and he's so perceptive and he's such a sponge. And I think there is a little bit of a like an eye rolling, like, "Mom," like, and some explanation of what feminism is, because I think there was this, like, is this saying girls are better than boys, right? That I think he like got that somewhere in some conversation. I had to do a lot of correcting and educating and
Wow.
saying, no, 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 no. Like you, like that's not what feminism is. It's about equality, and it's hard because they live in a different like world even than we did, right, growing up. And so he is maybe exposed to things in different ways. And so it was interesting. We watched some old sitcoms. He was really into Modern Family for a
Mhm,
while.
mhm.
And I was able to kind of point out and say, like, see how the dad is kind of the silly guy who doesn't do anything, and the mom's stressed out and running around and kind of nagging everybody. Like I feel like I had to kind of point these things out gradually and then kind of back off. And also I think really getting my husband on board because I
Mm.
notice like how my husband respond like sort of supports the work that I'm doing if I'm talking about, let's say, something like I posted or something. If he doesn't take if he's just like in a silly mood and kind of oh, that's makes fun of it in a lighthearted way that like we
Yes.
have a good banter, it's totally fine. But I get really annoyed if it's in front of my boys because I know that they're looking to him, and he has different power in this relationship and in this world. So there is a lot of coaching of my husband to understand this
Mm.
lens. I need his partnership in it in this to sort of, and that's hard. I feel that's not an empowering place. That feels and sometimes really vulnerable, and I come to him with that vulnerability of, I need you in this because doing it myself, I'm hoping, it gets internalized and this is a long-term game where, now at 11, he's not very mature, right? And is, gonna interpret it one way, but I kind of hope there's seeds that are planted for later,
For
right? And
sure.
and he observes and sees his father doing the dishes and doing the laundry and doing all the care work and seeing me sit down and seeing me work and seeing me experience joy and be silly. Like, so there's a lot that's not about talking, it's more about observing and modeling. So I don't know. I'm planting seeds and trying to correct things and trying to point out things, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Interestingly, my daughter said to me recently something, I can't remember how it came up, something along the lines of whenever they're not here for the weekend or whenever they're not around, I clean the whole house and all the sheets are changed. And, she said it as a compliment, but it came out sounding like, or like she said, it's so amazing whenever we're not here, all you do is sort of like you clean the whole house and change all the sheets. And I'm like, that's not just what I do, It's
Mm,
just like, oh, really? And I said, no, I also like go out with my friends, or I go and have a dance with somebody, or I go out for dinner, or I go to the movies, or I go to this stuff. And she's like, oh, you do such a good job just getting the house ready. I thought that's what you
mhm,
did. And it made me think, Erin, when you mention role modeling, I want to show them that I am more than the woman who cleans all the house
yeah,
and does all the things for them. They need to see me be a friend, be a
yeah,
lover, be a woman, be a businesswoman. And so often those parts we hide from our
yeah,
kids almost unconsciously, like they don't see us in those
mhm,
roles. And that's also a part of that generational pattern breaking as well,
mhm.
isn't it?
Yeah, because I think I think giving us credit, we want to protect them from parts of adulthood that they don't need to worry about. And some of us
That's
haven't
true.
weren't protected, right? Lots of people were not protected from adult problems,
Mhm.
right? And so there's that balance of wanting to create that safety and that security and predictability and all of that. But we do need to show, I think, more of our humanness and our
Yes.
multifacetedness and let them see our messy, authentic self so that they get to be that someday and that they expect that of women in their lives and men in their lives, and right, they need that, I think, those
It's hard,
experiences.
isn't it? No, I love the way that you've answered that. It's hard for us to, show our messiness.
Mhm.
Yeah, either
Mhm.
to our partners or to our children as well, because again, that's part of that good mother myth is that we're
Yeah.
always together. We're always trying, we're always on top of everything. It's why maternal rage and anxiety and all of that is so shameful because we
Yeah.
feel like we should be that, it's so funny how much we still hold this idea of the 1950s mother who's just got the
Mhm.
dinner on the table and everything's clean and everything's nice and ready. So you mentioned before about asking for help and the bigger system that we're trying to change here. Let's come back to that because that's also what we need to really we really need the world to change for mothers.
Yeah. I think so psychology in general, like the self-help world, the coaching world, a lot of it focuses on the individual, right?
Mm,
If you just follow this plan, if you just do this and this and this, you will self-actualize, you will cure whatever, right?
mhm,
And I think that that individualistic perspective one doesn't take into consideration all of the different sort of ways that people have privilege and also marginalization, right? Based on their intersecting identities, right? You might have different ways of like moving through the world. You might have access to different resources, right? You might have different, different traumas and things going on. And so this idea that one person can just follow a path and it'll, work for them, I think isn't realistic, isn't really true for most people. And part of that, right, is that we're humans that need other humans. We need community. We need community care. And so I have a post that went pretty viral or whatever. I don't
mm,
know, whatever that means, but it went pretty far. It was about this self-care idea that we need to, everyone's taught to self-care more. And I understand the value in that there is a nugget of that. We do need to remind mothers to prioritize their needs, right? In that list of things that you're doing for other people, make sure you put your oxygen mask on or whatever. I'm doing quotes all over the place if people are listening to this, right? Because it's almost we've heard it a lot. But you can't just take from yourself and give that to yourself without burning out.
mm.
That's not a sustainable way of going. We actually need other people to hold our baby so we can shower maybe, or we might need people to sort of give time. And I think it's a way of putting that responsibility again, that invisible load back on women, on mothers, to just say, you are responsible for caring. We need to change things in our society. And I know that's a long-term thing. I know it might not happen right away, but we need to change things so that mothers are not just pouring from that empty cup and being told to just somehow care for themselves better, right? And
Oh,
so part of what mothers can do individually who are listening is ask for that help. Is like, and that's hard. That's so
mhm,
hard in our culture to ask for help.
mm.
That might go against your own like upbringing where it wasn't safe to be dependent on someone, to rely on
Yeah.
someone.
And it's not just asking, it's then receiving as well. Because I know for me, I had a mother in law who was busting to come over and help every day. That's all she would, she
Mm,
had been living for this moment to finally be a grandmother and to care. And I couldn't accept it. There was
yeah.
such a block for me because that meant that I wasn't doing a good job. It meant that I felt like I
Mm,
was failing. Like there's so many layers to
yeah.
this, isn't there?
Yeah.
It reminds me also of how we tell new mums, sleep when the baby sleeps. And that used to frustrate me so much
Yes.
because if I sleep when the baby sleeps, that means when the baby wakes up, my house is a disaster. There is no food, nothing's cooked, nothing's washed, nothing's cleaned because my baby, once it's awake, has to be held all the time
Yeah.
because I had such an unhappy, unsettled baby. So, don't tell me to sleep when she sleeps because that is the only window I have to do all the other things that I have to do. These are the
Mhm.
messages that are so tied up with what we tell mothers they need to do to feel better. And it's falling back on them to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and people can say, "Oh, but the intention is good," right? So that's part of that invalidation that's hard.
Mm.
Like, on the surface, it seems so well, it's just benign. It's benign advice, but it's also when you have to see how that fits with all the other things that we receive, right? It's not just one thing that we get. It's like all the messages together compounding that impact how it feels, and like why you felt like it's a failure to ask for help, right?
Mhm.
Because sleep when the baby sleeps, that's like survive. That's like basic. That's don't do anything else. Just
Mm.
survive, and that's what we expect. We tell moms, just that's all you can do is try to survive because no
Mm.
one's gonna help you. No one's gonna, you know, that's not okay.
It's not okay. And I hope for the mamas listening, just understanding these bigger culture and societal issues, being able to see it through this lens helps you understand your thinking better. I know for me, once I finally found this work and dived head first into studying matricentric feminism and all of the theories that we've been talking about here, it finally allowed me to forgive myself for all of those feelings I had at the beginning of being so angry when somebody said to
Mm,
me, sleep when the baby sleeps. I didn't understand why that triggered me so much
yeah.
until I understood this. And
Yes.
then there was such a healing for me in that. And I really hope for everyone listening, you're feeling that too. And if this excites you, dive into Erin's work and dive into Mama Rising and have a look further, because I think there's a level of self-compassion that comes from realizing, oh, the reason why that made me so angry is because this is the system we live in. To
Yeah.
have a bigger lens when you look at it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's why the goal is healing, the goal is empowering. It's not necessarily fixing, right? We can't fix what's happened, but it's sort of like you said, realizing it, okay, I'm suffering in this system. I'm suffering the way it is. Let me not add on to that suffering the self-blame and self-shame. That's
Mm.
usually the thing I start with folks is working on. Okay, there's suffering, we want to address it, but let's at least help you realize that it's not your fault too. That's another layer that often we accept. Right? So that's part of this lens helps you say, okay, so this is the system. We're not alone in this. It's not because I failed. Then you can then kind of start to figure out, yeah, okay, how do I get myself to a better place? But yeah, I think it starts with this
It
perspective.
does, doesn't it? Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Erin, for the work you do and the way that you're sharing these theories and insights with mothers around the world. It's incredibly empowering to read your words and remember why we feel the way we do in the system that it is. And I agree, we can't realistically, it's not going to change in our lifetime. We will see hopefully some changes, but this is the life that we have at the moment. And so,
Mhm.
therefore, finding kindness and compassion within that is our goal for now.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, as always, for being a part of our global matrescence community. Please take a moment and make sure you're subscribed to this podcast in your podcast player so you can always be notified of our next episode. And if you would like to work with a coach on your own experience of matrescence, please go to mamarising.net and explore our directory of phenomenal coaches, workshop leaders, space holders and facilitators around the globe. You can also explore our Global Matrescence Foundation and consider donating so a mama in need can access the support of one of our coaches and still ensure that our coaches receive the income and support they need so they can continue to work in this way. And finally, if you would like to be a coach, a facilitator, and a matrescence activist in your own community, jump on our waitlist for our next intake of the Mama Rising Facilitator Training at mamarising.net. Thank you for being here and being part of this movement. Until next week, bye.